Rules Committee meeting, 2 o'clock. Call this meeting to order. So invocation, Counselor Vasquez, would you please do the honor?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We ask your blessing on all of us, that we use good voices, good thoughts, good actions. We are grateful that we get to serve the Cherokee citizens, and we ask your blessing on this meeting and the rest of the day. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Counselor. Roll call, Shelley.
Yes, sir. Joe Berg.
Honey.
Brandon Duncan.
Honey.
Keith Austin.
Here.
Harley Buzzard.
Here.
Julian Coates. John Princeton.
Honey.
Joe Deere. Mike Dobbins.
Here.
Rex Jordan.
Here.
Daryl Legg.
Here.
Wes Snowfire.
Honey.
Laura Petzkowski.
Here.
Mike Shambaugh.
Here.
Mary Bakershaw. Bonnie. Theo Smith.
Here.
Denise Taylor. Here. Victoria Vasquez. We have a forum.
Thank you, Shelley. This time I entertain approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the ayes have it.
Speaker, I move to amend the agenda to include the resolution regarding legislation proposed by the 5 civilized tribes.
Counselor, we're going to address that, but I want to do it at the tail end here so we get all the reports out of the way, if that's okay. This time I'd have to have a report from Marshal Shannon Buell.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry that I'm not there. I'm recovering from surgery. It went well, but the medicine's not doing too good for me.
Okay?
Other than what we have this month, we also have been running PPEs through the 14 counties and beyond this month as well. We've been pretty active with marshals helping out the MERC, running protective equipment, gowns, masks, to everything from retirement centers to clinics, nursing homes, you name it, we get it out to them. So we've been pretty busy with that.
Okay. You have the report in front of you. Any additional questions for our Marshal? Okay, thank you for the report, Marshal. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, Office of Attorney General, Sarah Hill.
I feel like she needs a chair.
There's a gentleman in the room somewhere. There you go.
I'd actually just as soon stand, it's fine. It's fine.
You should at least lean her.
I can use it to hold my stuff, that's good.
Here's one.
Yeah, sure. Council always one of the first people right there.
Thank you, council members. We have good people here.
Mr. Speaker, if the council would indulge me for a moment to make a few prefatory remarks before we get to the Rules Committee Attorney General's report. I want to say this as sincerely and clearly as I can. In the time that I have been in public service to the Cherokee Nation, starting on this council, actually starting on the Constitutional Convention, then following on this council and serving as Secretary of State and serving as Chief of the Cherokee Nation, I have never backed down from protecting the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation. In the discussions that I've had with council members this weekend and prior to that, those that I have communicated with that have called me have never accused me of having anything less than that dedicated spirit. And that's what I bring to you here today. The events of the past week reflect that your principal chief is engaged in this process. Now, I cannot be deaf and blind to the fact that the Congress of the United States has significant authority over Indian country. If I did that, then I ought to resign this post. But I do not feel that way. So I have been engaged. Our Attorney General has been engaged. Some of the best minds that we have to bear have been engaged. The statement of principles was a starting place, not an ending place. Now, I have been in public service for this long, I hope, not just because I have those firm principles, but that I also have the good sense to listen and be flexible. And here's what I've heard over the weekend from those of you on the council that called me and returned the calls. And I appreciate those that did. What I've heard is that we need to be very deliberate about this. And we need to make sure that not only, Chief, are you protecting the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation, but that you're listening to all voices. And I've committed to doing that. Just issued a statement along with Chief Batten and Governor Anatoly that if you would, Mr. Speaker, I can read briefly. I would like to read it for the council. You can read it for yourselves.
Go ahead.
The leaders of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw Nations have been and continue to be committed to discussing the parameters of the historic Supreme Court decision in the McGirt case. The leaders agree that any path forward requires strong collaboration between the 5 tribes. None of the leaders of the 5 tribes support eroding our sovereignty or turning back the recognition of our reservation achieved through McGirt. We feel that leaders of each tribe understand that we must be engaged with the State Attorney General and members of Oklahoma's congressional delegation if we are to have a meaningful voice in any legislative process that moves forward as a result of McGirt. Above all, each leader has a responsibility to the citizens we represent to protect our sovereignty. Last week's statements of principles began a discussion with the state and federal stakeholders. Upon further reflection, this isn't in the statement, Mr. Speaker, but I cannot underscore that enough. I've been this long in Cherokee public life because I had the good sense to listen. But let me continue. Listen and learn from feedback. After obtaining feedback from the people we represent, leaders of the Cherokee Nation, Chickasaw, and Choctaw Nation agree that more discussion is warranted with stakeholders in the general public. We remain committed to communicating with and responding to the stakeholders and tribal citizens about the statement of principles, and we are committed to take the time to do that. We remain deeply respectful of Chief Hill of the Creek Nation and Chief Chilcote of the Seminole Nation's views on this matter on behalf of their respective nations, and will continue to work with them on this issue. The leaders of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw Nations are engaged in wide-ranging discussions of issues surrounding tribal, state, and federal jurisdiction in light of McGirt. We all agree that such discussion must address the parameters of criminal jurisdiction and potential impacts of the McGirt case on civil jurisdiction, and must involve members of Congress and state leaders. We are optimistic that the leadership of the 5 tribes will demonstrate the wisdom to remain engaged in a unified manner with stakeholders as we move forward cautiously and carefully on matters impacting the McGirt case. That statement has gone out. Just a bit further, Mr. Speaker, I have had wonderful conversations this morning with each leader of the 5 tribes. Very productive, very respectful. We want unity. We all have different positions that we occupy because we have different nations and different governmental processes. And I respect each and every one of them. But I'm going to continue to do the job that I was elected to do, which is to represent the Cherokee Nation and make sure that anything Congress does in response to McGirt has us at the table. If you're not at the table, we know this from our history, you're on the menu. The Cherokee Nation is not going to be on the menu as long as I'm chief. We're going to be engaged. But I also want to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that I have been around public life in the Cherokee Nation long enough. Perhaps that's why I have the good fortune today to occupy this seat, because I have been willing to listen and learn. 2 more comments. One of the ways that I've listened and learned is talking this morning to my dear friend, our former Supreme Court Justice, Dean of the University of Arkansas Law School, Stacey Leeds, who's here in the room, and has joined me today. We had a tremendously impactful conversation this morning along the lines of the statement that I just read. And I told her what I am telling you, which is that I am willing to listen, because I think that's in the best interest of the Cherokee Nation. I need to do so, though, with the full authority as the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation that I was elected to do. I need to do so with an Attorney General who has your unanimous support, and I believe has your full confidence. And I can tell you without question she has mine. So with that said, Mr. Speaker, I just want to dispose any notion that I have given away our sovereignty. It's a statement that ought to offend any tribal leader, and it offends me. But I'm not going to spend another minute being offended. I'm going to spend the rest of this term in office making sure I continue to protect the sovereignty of the Cherokee Nation. I'll do it before the Congress of the United States. I've done it before the Congress of the United States. I'll do it in the courts. I've done it in the courts. I'll do it in the public. I will protect this tribe. I take it serious. That is, Mr. Speaker, why I entered public service in the first place. And I yield back to the Attorney General. Go.
Chief, before we turn it over to Attorney General, I want to commend you in those words that you said that you're going to protect the sovereignty with all the resources that we have here at the tribe. And it eases my mind when you bring in somebody like Stacy Leeds, and we have our Attorney General sitting by your side, and we have that most faith in her. You know, with Stacy's background, I would recommend / ask you to have her be part of your negotiating team before that final draft is made.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker, and I think it would be wise to have as many minds on deck as we tackle this historic opportunity to not only respond to the Congress's response to McGirt, but to make sure McGirt is the enduring principle that it has to be, and it's going to take that kind of leadership. And so my commitment to you is that if Stacy Leeds will continue to advise, I will continue to accept that advice. Our Attorney General will continue to accept it. We want what is best for the Cherokee Nation. I don't want what is best for the fate of the Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin. I want it what is best for the Cherokee Nation. So you have my commitment, Mr. Speaker. I do want to yield to the Attorney General. I will answer any and all questions from each and every member of this body, as I'm always committed to do.
Okay. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Sarah Hill, you're up.
All right. Kind of a tough act to follow. So I think that, you know, I'm extraordinarily pleased and happy to be here today because I think that it is difficult to watch from the sidelines as people have a lot of different opinions about things that are going on in Cherokee Nation, important things, and not have an opportunity to address this body and explain to you the agreement principle. I talked to you about it, you know, briefly in a Zoom meeting, not always the best way to communicate something. So I'm happy to have an opportunity to walk you through the agreement in principle, what it means, what it doesn't mean, the things that I've heard people say that I think are really missing the mark about what the agreement in principle was designed to stand for. But as the Chief mentioned, the most difficult thing to hear is people saying that we're giving away tribal sovereignty. And I would just say for a minute that tribal sovereignty is not a thing that you have. It's not like a painting that you just put up on a wall somewhere and this is something that the tribe has. But tribal sovereignty is a thing of action. It is something that we have to, as a tribe, be willing to use to defend the Cherokee people, to defend our institutions. And so sovereignty isn't something that we can give away. Sovereignty is something that we have to use to protect ourselves. And I think that is what our focus has been in the McGirt case. The McGirt case, you know, was and is a Creek Nation case that focused on criminal jurisdiction. And the limitations of that case, in its own terms, you know, Justice Gorsuch says, I don't really know what this means for the civil aspects of this case, but for the criminal part of it, he made it extremely clear that the Creek Reservation continued to persist, that you can be an Oklahoman and you can be on the reservation of the Creek Nation, and I think that's true for Cherokee Nation as well. The legal history of the 5 tribes is so similar. Though I think that the reservation of the Cherokee Nation, as the nation's always maintained, continues today, and I think the McGirt case stands for that same proposition for the Cherokee Nation, that the Cherokee Nation's reservation is and always has been alive and well in Oklahoma. In discussions with the Oklahoma Attorney General, there were some things that became immediately apparent to us, and these were discussions going on between all of the 5 tribes at that time and the Attorney General. And one principle that we were able to agree on was that there was no daylight between the state and the tribes in terms of law enforcement. And we wanted to be sure that people who committed crimes were held accountable for those crimes, that victims were protected and received justice. And that was important to all of them. That was one of the principles upon which the agreement principle is based, that we needed to be sure that victims receive justice, and that the tribes and the state could work together to provide justice for people in Indian country. This is not a new concept to us, because we know, going back to the cross-deputization agreements over the years, on lots of different occasions, the tribe and the state have worked together to ensure that that was the case, so that an officer who went on to tribal land, who was a state officer, could put on that tribal hat and act as a tribal law enforcement, so that the victim didn't have to worry about that. The criminal could be arrested, and that people could be protected under our cross-deputization agreement. The principle that we adopted for the criminal jurisdiction was that, first of all, nothing in the agreement would undermine the reach of tribal sovereignty or diminish tribal authority over the reservation. That the tribe would maintain the capacity to exert criminal jurisdiction over the entirety of our reservation. That is a much different circumstance than what has happened pre-McGirt. So prior to the McGirt decision, if a Cherokee citizen committed a crime on a piece of fee land off of tribal trust or restricted land, the state would arrest that person, and the tribe could not. The tribe did not arrest people who committed crimes on fee land. And under the agreement in principle, we extended to the maximum extent the criminal jurisdiction of the tribe over our own reservation, which is consistent with the principle that's laid out in McGirt. So no part of the tribal jurisdiction has been surrendered or is even contemplated to be surrendered in the agreement in principle. So it's full criminal jurisdiction by the tribe over the reservation. Now, because of other matters of federal Indian law, and you can look at your chart here that you've got in your handout, because of other principles of federal Indian law, the tribe cannot arrest, the tribe cannot arrest non-Indians who commit crimes on the reservation. That power lies with the state or with the federal government to arrest non-Indians. So on a reservation, criminal jurisdiction works very differently than it works outside of a reservation. So on a reservation, if a person commits a crime, an Indian commits a crime, they can only be arrested by the tribe. If that crime, I'll say a crime such as assault and battery, a simple assault and battery, only the tribe could arrest the Indian on the reservation. The state would have no authority to prosecute that person. So if there was an altercation in downtown Tahlequah, the state would not have the authority to prosecute two Indians who got into an assault and battery situation in the middle of downtown Tahlequah on a reservation. That's just the way that it works. And if a non-Indian and another non-Indian commit a crime in downtown Tahlequah, they're involved in an assault and battery, the tribe has no jurisdiction to arrest those people, only the state can. So it's a split system where the tribe and the state have jurisdiction over different people at different times based upon their status as an Indian. So under the agreement in principle, this tribe and the state would instead have concurrent jurisdiction over those crimes. The tribe would retain jurisdiction to arrest Indians throughout its reservation boundaries, but the state would have restored to it the right to also arrest individuals and to prosecute individuals who commit crimes. That takes away a system where you have a split system where you have different people that can arrest at different times, and instead unifies that law enforcement response so that either the state or the tribe could exert criminal jurisdiction in that circumstance. That is the criminal jurisdiction piece of the agreement in principle. The fact that there's no daylight between the state and the tribe, we all want safe communities, we all want effective law enforcement. I think that makes perfect sense. It did not in any way impinge on the right of the tribe to exercise full jurisdiction over Indians inside our reservation. So it did no harm to the sovereignty of the tribe under the McGirt case. So it was consistent with the principles that we laid out. So that's the criminal jurisdiction agreement in principle that we started with, that would be something that would be beneficial to tribal communities.
Sarah?
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, give me, I see the pre and post here. I really need to be convinced on how this is going to affect VAWA. Give me an example.
I'm glad that you asked that, because I know this is a question that has been raised multiple times. So under the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, tribes were given authority to arrest non-Indians on their reservations under certain circumstances. It's called special domestic violence jurisdiction. That is specifically saved in the agreement principle. It is called out as the tribe retains special domestic violence jurisdiction over non-Indians on the reservation. That is one of the unique circumstances where a tribe can arrest a non-Indian, and that is maintained under the agreement in principle. In domestic violence generally, you have civil protective orders that are issued between individuals. And so on a protective order, the state of Oklahoma and the tribes have full faith and credit between them, which means if our tribal court issues a protective order to a woman who's been abused, she can take that over to the state court and the state court can enforce it. Likewise, if that woman goes to the state court and requests a protective order and receives it, she can take it to the tribal court and that order will be enforced by the tribal court. So there is seamless jurisdiction both for protective orders, and the tribe maintains its special domestic violence jurisdiction over non-Indians on the reservation, throughout the reservation, under the agreement in principle.
Very good. Thank you.
So the chart that you have, and I think it's because a lot of people don't understand how criminal jurisdiction works on a tribal reservation. So what we try to do is break this down so you can follow the chart, because it really does matter whether it's an Indian or a non-Indian. Is it a non-Indian victim? Is it a non-Indian defendant? And this chart shows who would have jurisdiction under what circumstances. Now this doesn't cover every circumstance because it is a complex area of the law. That complexity can be used by criminals who want to get away with crimes. That complexity can be used to deny justice to victims in our communities. And that's why under the agreement in principle, we're adding the state back in cases where a non-Indian defendant and an Indian victim, and in cases where there's an Indian defendant and a non-Indian victim, so that the state would have jurisdiction to make those arrests and to make those prosecutions. I think from a resource point of view, you have to consider that as well. The Marshal Service, it does a great job. We have incredibly qualified officers, but the Cherokee Nation's reservation is enormous, and they already fight to be able to be available at Kenwood, and then up to Nowata County to a different piece of restricted land. It's already a struggle for them to do that. The resources that would be required for us to have a police presence throughout the reservation, and to detention, so sentencing, putting people into jail and paying for all of that, those resource issues are also concerns, I think, that have to be considered in making these decisions. So that is the criminal jurisdiction part of the agreement in principle. Are there questions that I can answer for you about the criminal jurisdiction piece?
Any questions for Attorney General? Yes, Councilor No Fire.
Yeah, first, I just want to congratulate the Creek Nation on the historical victory on the SCOTUS decision. I don't think that's been reiterated enough, and I don't really remember hearing much spoken about that. It was quickly jumped to all 5 civilized tribes. This was their decision. Now, Attorney General, you solicited the legal advice about the agreement in principle to all counselors without informing our own legal aid. That's not just a problem with me, that's also a problem with the Oklahoma Bar Code of Ethics. But I'd like to publicly hear from our legal counsel so that way all of our counselors can hear his opinion of this agreement in principle. It is very important that we have our own legal advice on this. You said that very few people know about these things, but I've spoken to a lot of attorneys. They say otherwise, and I'd like to hear from my own legal counsel on this. Tim?
Well, specifically, I've addressed this quite a bit. The agreement principle I can address, but the first thing that I wanted to address was the fact that the power to approve these agreements of any type is a power of the council. And I wanted to make sure that the council was aware that that was their power. And so part of my job is to make sure that I defend your power and your authority under the Constitution. The second thing is that I wasn't included in the initial briefing of the council, which prevented me from being able to do my job as counsel to, as attorney to the council. I received an email after the fact saying that I would be brought up to speed at a later time and given about a 30-minute window to call the next day. So those are the two main things for me, as far as what led up to the agreement in principle. Again, I'm available at any time for any of the council members to call me. I had multiple council members that did call me and asked me for their input on this Murphy and McGirt decision. Specifically, just going through the McGirt decision.
I have one question though. So is it true or is it not true that you have represented and maybe do represent Seminole Nation and or Chief Chilcote on this exact issue?
No, I had previously, and that's the thing, is that instead of being able to talk about the agreement principle, I'm being personally attacked by a rumor.
Well, I've had an ethics violation raised by a councilman, and he seemed to indicate that.
Well, because I'm protecting my own self by allowing my legal to come and speak
So
for
I'm just
council.
trying to explore this issue.
Counselor Brown, give a few synopsis on your thinking here, then if the council members have questions, they'll do the same. And that's what we did with Sarah. We'll move this thing along. We're not going to get into a debate right here. We're going to try to get things accomplished today.
I think the council has seen the agreement principle. I think if you read through it and you see anywhere that it says affirm the sovereignty or affirm the jurisdiction, those are things we already have. If you see the word provide the state with jurisdiction, provide the state with civil jurisdiction, those are things we're given. And so you guys can read the agreement principle for yourself. I would say that under tribal jurisdiction, 5 tribes already have criminal jurisdiction over all Indians that commit crimes
Mr.
within our
Speaker,
jurisdiction.
I would like an opportunity to finish my own report before he gets into issues that I haven't even had a chance to discuss yet with the
Point of
council.
order, I've already asked the question to my legal to counsel. He has the right to finish.
You
Well,
had an opportunity
we are
to
given,
about my presence.
what we're having here is Attorney General's report. And we can have, Tim, you can come and report to us here in a bit, but let's get with our reports here before we get into the gist of all this, okay? Because we're not going to debate it right now. Attorney General, I want you to finish your report, and then council members, you have questions. We're going to get through this, then we'll leave that at the end of these reports to come and talk about more in detail the McGirt case, okay?
Sorry.
Speaker, can I be excused until you're ready for me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Talk through then the criminal jurisdiction piece of the agreement principle, and now I'd like to move to the civil jurisdiction piece of the agreement principle. So on the criminal jurisdiction, I think, again, it was based on cross-deputization, trying to bring more resources to bear for law enforcement, not take away resources for law enforcement under McGirt. On civil jurisdiction, it is admittedly a much more complicated issue than trying to deal with criminal jurisdiction. The law of criminal jurisdiction, who has jurisdiction under what circumstances, is very clear. It's very bright line. Indian, non-Indian, on Indian country, these are the different entities that have jurisdiction. On civil jurisdiction, the court didn't really make it clear what the civil jurisdiction would be of either the tribes or the state. It just didn't speak to that. So we have to go to what the federal law is regarding civil jurisdiction. And what the agreement in principle, first of all, stands for, goes back to that same principle, the principle that guided the entire agreement, that nothing in the agreement can undermine the reach of tribal sovereignty or diminish tribal authority over the reservation. And in civil jurisdiction, that includes member Indians. So under A, it specifically talks about affirming the 5 tribes' civil jurisdiction throughout their respective treaty territories. And that gives the tribe broad authority certainly over member Indians. I think that is clear under the law. And that would be true throughout the reservation. And this is different than what people's expectations were prior to the McGirt case, where the idea was that the tribal jurisdiction was really limited to just these tribal trust and restricted pieces. And now, under this agreement principle, both the Oklahoma Attorney General and the tribes have agreed that civil jurisdiction of the tribes is throughout the jurisdictional, and it affects all member Indians. It does also talk about jurisdiction over non-Indians, which is by far politically the most touchy subject, because there are many people in the regulated community, many people in the business community, and just citizens who feel like, under what circumstances can a tribal government that I have no vote in, that I have no connection with, go in and tell me what to do or dictate how I live my life? And so there were a lot of questions like that. Federal law already exists on this topic, which limits tribal jurisdiction over non-Indians. It has nothing to do with the agreement in principle. It's already federal law under a case called Montana. The Montana case and its progeny, all the cases that interpreted Montana, stand for the principle that under most circumstances, tribes cannot exercise civil jurisdiction over non-Indians. There are some exceptions to that, which are specifically laid out here. One of them is A, subject to matters for which federal law specifically grants tribes jurisdiction, and that again goes back to issues like VAWA, where federal law specifically says that tribes do have jurisdiction over non-Indians. 2, activities of non-members that are part of a consensual relationship, and there's lots of case law about what constitutes a consensual relationship. And then finally, conduct of non-members that threatens tribal self-governance or the economic security, health, or welfare of the tribe. Under those circumstances, the tribe can exercise jurisdiction over non-Indians on its reservation. And that is not called out in here because we invented this restriction. It's called out in here because that's already the state of the law. That's already what the Supreme Court has laid down. Yes, ma'am.
Can you please tell me what you're reading from so I can follow it when it's
This is
speaking?
the agreement in principle.
Okay, did we get a copy of that? Did we? Did we get one?
If you don't have one, we can certainly get you. It's available everywhere and it's not a problem to get you.
I just wanted to follow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have an extra copy or I would give it to you.
What is Counselor Dean?
She needs a copy of the agreement in principle.
I just wanted a copy so I could follow her.
Okay. Here you go.
Oh, thanks, Janine.
So the agreement in principle also talks about restoration of jurisdiction or clarification. Again, the law of civil jurisdiction is not as clear as the law of criminal jurisdiction, but it would give the state civil jurisdiction over Indians and non-Indians throughout the reservation. And that would include situations, I talked about this in the little explainer video that Chief and I put up. If you're in a public park and there's a city ordinance that says that dogs have to be on a leash, that both Indians and non-Indians would have to obey that leash law, that the state could give you a ticket for that if you violated their leash law, so that Indians and non-Indians would both be subject to things like zoning laws and other regulations, also that permits that tribal citizens have received from Oklahoma would still be, business permits, things of that nature. So it would clarify that the existing structure, they would maintain jurisdiction for certain purposes, and also like the mask rule in Tulsa. So there are people, and I've already seen online, people saying, well, I don't have to wear a mask because I'm an Indian. So it would be restoring to the state or affirming that the state had jurisdiction to regulate both Indians and non-Indians on the reservation. There are some huge caveats to that, though. The huge caveats are all designed to protect the tribe. We're trying to put an umbrella, a shield over the tribal government to protect it from state interference, because we know, going back as far as Georgia, that the state has the capacity to do a lot of harm to tribes if the tribal government is not shielded from state interference in the tribal government. So the state cannot regulate the tribe itself, cannot regulate, cannot tax, set any restrictions on the tribe itself, nor the wholly owned entities of the tribe, which would include our businesses that actually provide the revenue that helps the government function and do the services that it needs. And finally, all officials and employees of the Cherokee Nation acting in their official capacity. So that puts a broad area of protection over the tribal government itself so that it can continue to do the job free from interference from the state government. So those would be some of the provisions. There are many other, and it also specifically says the legislation would not grant the state jurisdiction to regulate or tax directly or indirectly the tribe, tribal businesses, or tribal employees or citizens acting in their, employees or officials acting in their official capacity. And we don't have all of the details worked out on what exactly that means. There are a lot of issues that remain, taxation issues, lots of issues that have not been resolved by this, and it wasn't intended to. What we intended to do is put forth what are those areas upon which there is broad agreement that we could use as a beginning of this conversation about what future legislation would look like. What are those areas that we agree are potential problems, and what are some potential solutions that the tribes and the states could agree upon? And so there are two other sort of general provisions that I wanted to point out. One of them talks about protecting tribal sovereignty and consistency in law enforcement by affirming that only the nations will exercise tribal jurisdiction within their respective treaty territory. And then also a request for additional allocation of resources from the United States, because during this time, certainly the Creek Nation, who, Councilman No Fire correctly points out, this is a Creek Nation, affects the Creek Nation specifically, but more resources, law enforcement resources will be needed. But although it's a Creek Nation case, I do think it's important to know that the Creek Nation didn't file it. It was filed by a criminal defendant who had committed a heinous murder, for which he wanted to get out of the death penalty, which he had been sentenced to serve in Oklahoma. And the McGirt case dealt with a sexual assault case. And he was seeking to get out of a conviction that he had received in the state courts. And so when I talk about law enforcement and creating seamless law enforcement and creating justice for individuals, that's where I think the state and the tribes have a very similar interest. We all want to be sure that people that commit crimes are held accountable, and it is my commitment that I will work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the state to be sure that that occurs. So that is the agreement in principle in short, and it walks through, and as Chief said, it's not that this is set in stone. This is an agreement in principle. Is not something, it's not binding on anybody. It's not something that the Cherokee Nation or any other tribe, as you can see from the Creek Nation, deciding that they, maybe they weren't going to be engaged in this process under the agreement in principle. It's not binding. But it's an attempt to just lay down what are those areas upon which we think there are broad agreement. So we would have a marker laid down. And I found out today that Governor Stitt, by executive order, just created the Oklahoma Commission on Cooperative Sovereignty, where he will begin to express, presumably, his opinions about what any legislation would look like. There's been legislation brought forward by other interests in Oklahoma, which are much more negative to the tribes. And so what we're doing is we're laying out a marker to say the tribes and the state can work together on solutions that are mutually agreeable, on areas where there is broad agreement. And I think that that protects the tribe. It protects us when Congress is the one entity that can go back and undo McGirt. Gorsuch never said in his opinion that the tribe reservation had to exist forever. He never said that the United States had to honor those treaties. He only said that if the United States wanted to dishonor those treaties, that Congress had to say so explicitly. That's one sentence that would need to be put in a piece of federal legislation to say the reservations of the 5 tribes are hereby disestablished. And making sure that that doesn't happen, making sure that we are paying attention to what's going on in Congress and that we're engaged in this process is how we make sure that the win that we got today does not get snatched away from us in practice like it has in the past in Cherokee history on more than one occasion. So I wanted to just let you all understand where we're coming from, what the purpose of this was, what the agreement principle really means and what it really looks like, and then answer your questions if I can.
Thank you for that. We're going to open it up for questions. To my right here. Councilor Austin, Councilor Buzzard. Anybody on this end? Okay. Dora?
I just wanted to touch base regarding the violence against women, which I know you have discussed, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that effort, and I just feel that's really important, and I thank you for that.
I appreciate that. I 100% agree, and that's, I know that there is nobody, the principal chief would never, I would never, I don't think anyone in this administration would ever do anything to put the Cherokee Nation at a disadvantage in protecting women. And anyone who claims otherwise, I think, has not looked at the history. A protective order is a piece of paper, and lots of women with protective orders end up dead. What protects women is having services in place like One Fire, so that they have housing and medical care, and they have access to the things that they need to get safely away from their abusers. And the Cherokee Nation's vested in that heavily, and will continue to be. And I certainly would never do anything that I thought put any woman at risk, and I certainly would never be in a situation where I would agree that Cherokee Nation should give away any part of its ability to hold people who abuse women accountable in our courts.
Okay. Is that good? Councilor Taylor?
And I have a question. It's not regarding the agreement in principle, but on the McGirt case. I've had a couple, or on the McGirt decision, I should say. I've had a few phone calls from people curious about what this means for a previous conviction or a previous case or something like that. And we've talked about this, and I need to know where to send them. It needs to be, you know, somebody that's well-versed in Indian law, somebody that cares to take up this mantle, or if we could do some type of a FAQ that we could point people towards, because I'm getting calls to that effect. People who maybe have a conviction that they're thinking this may affect, and they need to talk to somebody that understands what this actually means for them.
Right.
So would you have us direct them just to the members of the Cherokee Bar Association, or what?
There are members of the Cherokee Bar that are specifically soliciting people that have those kinds of questions. Every case is going to be different, because there are certain cases where you wouldn't want to be retried federally because the federal penalty may be worse than the state penalty. That's actually a really pretty big problem for a lot of people that have these previous convictions. They really need to talk to a defense attorney who's knowledgeable not just in Indian law, but there's a very specific practice about under what circumstances you can obtain post-conviction relief. As a prosecutor in my career, I haven't had to deal with trying to help a person navigate those post-conviction relief opportunities. Oklahoma Indian Legal Services, I know they don't do a lot of criminal law, and they're particularly probably overburdened in light of McGirt. I think it's worth talking to them about it to see if they have names of people. And I do know there are local members of the Cherokee Bar who are taking these cases. And there have been, just in the last week, I know I've heard of probably in the neighborhood of 100 different cases filed where people are filing these cases. It's just a Creek Nation decision, so people are still not completely clear about the other reservations of the 5 tribes. So there's going to be a lot of those filed, and I will work with you to get you some additional information. I hate to say send them to this defense attorney.
Well, I don't think that's appropriate for us.
Right, because I'm going to try to go back and prosecute those people. If I have jurisdiction over them and they're able to get out of their state conviction, I will try to prosecute them in tribal court if I can, right? So I'm not the person to ask, but we do need to find them resources. I take your point.
Okay, that's all I have.
Anybody else on this side? Councilor Kane?
Gibson. You've answered a few of my questions, General, but so one thing is you guys have been working on this for a while. So why haven't you come to council and reported to us before now, kind of?
So prior to the decision in the McGirt case, all of the parties were under a non-disclosure agreement completely. There were major concerns that if it was made publicly aware that the conversations were going on between the tribe and the state, that the Supreme Court would get wind of that and decide in favor of the tribes perhaps when they might otherwise not be willing to. So the only way those conversations could happen would be under a strict non-disclosure agreement. So there was no way to have those conversations prior to the McGirt decision being issued.
Okay.
They wouldn't have engaged in those discussions with us if I was reporting out to a public council. It wouldn't have felt like that was appropriate for them to do. There just would have been no discussions at all.
Gotcha. So you talked about, I joined the calls that you guys had. You talked about how it affects the criminal jurisdiction part, and it's not really centered on civil jurisdiction. But do we retain the right to tax businesses or anything like that?
Tribal taxation on a reservation is a complicated issue, Councilman, and I wish I could give you a really great answer. Certainly, there are types of taxes that the tribe could enact. Those taxes are mostly going to be limited to taxes on our own citizens instead of on non-Indians. And the circumstances under which we could levy those taxes are going to vary very much. And since I have been the Attorney General of a non-reservation tribe, or at least the state of Oklahoma did not treat it as a reservation tribe. There's still a lot of tax issues that I think that we're going to have to work out. There are not areas of broad agreement on the tax issues, so there's still very much all discussions that we need to have. But I would say the area of tribal taxation is incredibly complex, and one that we probably should sit down and talk about one-on-one. If you have a specific type of tax that you want to need to explore and say, could we levy this type of tax on our citizens, or those types
But
of
the point is, we still hold the power to do that if we so choose.
Yeah, and the agreement in principle would in no way prohibit the tribe from doing that. We're not in any way saying that the tribe is going to give away any of its authority to tax or to regulate or do anything else on our own reservation.
Okay, does it prohibit our hunting and fishing rights in any way?
No, there are 3 exceptions to all of this, and nothing in this agreement is designed to affect hunting and fishing or water, because I think there are lots of issues that still have to be settled between the state and the tribes, and when it comes to hunting and fishing and water, the tribes are unwilling to give any of their position up, and we're unwilling to give the state any authority it has. It will make those arguments, but we're not going to assist them in any of that.
That's all I
Good.
got, Speaker. Thank you,
Any
General.
questions there? Counselor Shambaugh.
Because McGuirk was about jurisdiction, and I guess if they were to say, here you go, and they would hand us all the jurisdiction over all this area. First of all, our court system is not set up for that. It's not big enough. We don't have the attorneys. We don't have the prosecutors. We don't have the jail space. We just don't have the system to deal with that. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Okay. Knowing this, even worldwide, countries who are sovereign ask for help at times. I mean, it's almost like nobody wants to ask for help because it ruins our sovereignty. It has nothing to do with your sovereignty. You know, everybody needs help from time to time. And if we are going to meet the needs of the people, of our people, and keep them safe and serve them, then we will have to ask for help. From the feds, from the state. That's the way it's been. It doesn't degrade our sovereignty at all. And you know and the people who say it does, that's not correct. I don't feel it's correct. I mean, we are not giving anything up over that. We are simply doing what we need to do to protect our people. And if we did have to do all those things and to spend all that money, that would be a vast amount of money to upgrade everything to deal with a new system that would not only be tribal court, federal court. I mean, there's a distinction between those and where they would go and what the crimes would, and the punishment for the crimes. All of those things, there's a lot of things that go into this that could go into this actually, if that's the way it is. So we are going to have to make some compacts with some, and get some help doing these things because, you know, you can't not be afraid to ask for help. You can't. And when we start looking at this whole deal and what's in the future, you know, and we say it doesn't bother our land rights, our water rights. Well, you know, then you're starting to get, if we get into water rights and we own that water, and you start getting into City of Tulsa, GRDA, Corps of Engineers. I mean, if we own that, I mean, they didn't actually have any right to make any compacts in the first place with anybody and sell. I mean, there is so many things that could be a positive in the future. But there are also things in this that can be negative too, just a bit for us, such as cost and manpower and a system that we are not ready to, I guess, step right into. We would have to build it up so big, and it would cost us so much money. So there's a lot of things to be discussed. But you know what you guys have done? I just think you have done things to protect our sovereignty. I think you have addressed these things. You've laid it out to us. No, is it a work in progress? Absolutely. But you know, this is new. This is something new for everybody. But you know, somebody has to take that first step to say, hey, look, these are some issues that we need to address. And you guys have done that. I appreciate you doing that, and continue to expect you as this progresses. I expect this to you adapt to whatever happens. Whenever Congress gets involved, whenever big companies get involved, this thing is going to take a life of its own, and it's not going to be easy. But I do appreciate what you've laid out and what you've done to protect our sovereignty, and I am a firm believer that that is exactly what you have done.
Thank you, Councilman. That is incredibly kind of you to say. I think maybe because of your law enforcement background, you're putting your finger on an issue which I think is important, which is that we are United States citizens, we are Oklahomans, and we are Cherokees on our own reservation today. And that means that intergovernmental cooperation is what we do. You know, the state of Oklahoma gets assistance from FBI when there are federal crimes. They get assistance from the federal government when they need it. I've had a special assistant U.S. attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for a year prosecuting Indian country crime as a special assistant U.S. attorney. There are cross-deputization agreements. The federal and state and counties, all of these people are interconnected with intergovernmental agreements because nobody can do this by themselves. It takes intergovernmental collaboration for law enforcement to work. And I think that's what we're contemplating here. And I don't think it's going to be different for us. We are all going to have to learn to work together because this is still Oklahoma. It's the Cherokee Nation's reservation. It's still part of Oklahoma, and it's still a government that we're always going to have to deal with. The Cherokee Nation and Oklahoma are always going to have intergovernmental cooperation.
And I can tell you that probably the 15 phone calls I've received from different agencies and different officers and things like that are asking these very questions. And people are nervous about not having jurisdiction, not having backup, things like that. And I think they'll be somewhat relieved to hear that, to know that this is exactly what we need to work together with everyone. That is the key to success. I don't care what it is, and communication. And that's why I'm so glad that we're doing what we're doing today, because we need to hear from everybody. I mean, and this is how we make informed decisions. And you know, you've laid it out, and I think this will answer a lot of questions that were unanswered for us today. And just like to thank you again.
Thank you, Councilman.
Anybody over here? Yo, Rex?
Yes, I have a question. I won't go down the route because I figure you might still be giving your report, but I do have something in mind, and it goes to our chief and his comments that what he made in the opening remarks, which were very prolific in his statement to him being involved with the Constitution Convention in '99. So then he would know that in the Article 7, Section 9 of the Constitution states that the principal chief may cause to be formed and operated trusts, the beneficiary of which shall be the Cherokee Nation, and these trusts shall be granted such powers as provided by law for public trusts. Authorization for these trusts, however, must be approved by a majority vote of the council. When did these discussions and when did this agreement ever come before the council's vote?
How is this a trust would be maybe my question.
Because it's the laws of the Cherokee Nation that are faithfully executed by the principal chief.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, having been a delegate so many years ago, my memory might be a little rusty, but my knowledge of the law is reasonably sharp on this subject. The provision that he refers to is wholly irrelevant to the constitutional position of the elected chief of the Cherokee Nation to engage with members of Congress. If you took his statement to its logical conclusion, there would be no circumstance under which I could have a meeting with Senator Langford, a meeting with the governor, a meeting with the Attorney General, and lay out expectations for that meeting or for future legislation. Had the councilman his logic held when we attempted to get the Stigler Act fixed, which we did, down to the 11th hour, mind you, with a great team on board, including Sarah Hill and Ken Keehee, perhaps we could have stopped the Congress and asked them if we could call a council meeting. And the Congress of the United States would have said, we're doing our legislation. It's irrelevant. It's important. It's important for what it means. It's not about establishing a trust, an institution, an entity. This is about whether the chief of the Cherokee Nation, elected by the people of the Cherokee Nation, the Attorney General, unanimously supported by every sitting member of this council, has the authority to do their constitutional job. So with all due respect to the council, there has been an ethics charge against my Attorney General, there has been a questioning of my commitment to sovereignty, and now there's been a questioning of my violation of the Constitution. And I want to tell you emphatically, Mr. Speaker, every one of those things is wrong and it's inappropriate. Whatever.
Speaker, it's not inappropriate whenever I'm specifically reading the Constitution. If you felt that was something I was charging you with, I would have directed it as a charge. I was simply asking about the method that you went to go and authorize, expressing that you made an agreement on the Cherokee Nation's behalf whenever there was never a law placed for you to do so. I agree with you, Chief, that you can go speak to all these senators. You can make proposal ideas with them of what to do. However, when you go explicitly state that we're going to make this agreement on behalf of the Cherokee Nation, and that's the reason why the citizens outside, the thousands of citizens have called in, the thousands of citizens and legal-minded experts have voiced their concerns about an agreement in principle. That's all I was trying to ask was how did you get that authority to make the agreement?
Your suggestion, Councilman, let's be plain. And this suggestion, by the way, could have been made in the conference call that you did not attend. It could have been made in any number of opportunities you had to contact me, which you did not, unlike your colleagues. But let's be clear. You're not simply asking the question. You're making an implicit indictment. I've got eyes, I've got ears, and every one of your colleagues does. I've not violated the Constitution. You're misreading the Constitution. Your legal counsel may want to give you advice, and he may agree with you. But I can tell you I know the Constitution, and so does my Attorney General. So this insinuation that I have violated the Constitution is wrong, and I'm going to push back on it every single time.
Speaker, I keep wanting to say that he thinks I'm insinuating, and I would like to hear from our legal counsel on this.
We're
like
going
I
to move
wanted
on
before.
first. I'm giving everybody an opportunity to speak here.
And we were just discussing about what I was speaking about.
Yeah, but we're going to move on. You've asked.
That's fine, and we'll come back around.
Yes. Councilor Legg.
I'm good.
Okay. Councilor Shaw.
Yes.
Councilor Deere.
I didn't realize,
Did you have a question, Mary?
Oh, did you? Go ahead.
I didn't realize there were so many attorneys at large, but there are. And they have sent me countless messages, emails, and phone calls over the weekend. Unlike probably the others sitting here, I heard from so many of them. I now realize there should be more than 2 at-large counselors because the response on this has just been overwhelming. But I promised to ask a couple of these. Is this the right time to do it?
Certainly.
Okay. The agreement that Oklahoma Attorney General Hunter released, purportedly in collaboration with the 5 tribes, would essentially nullify the Supreme Court's decision in the McGirt case, which confirmed our sovereignty.
That is incorrect. I think if the agreement in principle, and if I am just to answer shortly, we talked in the agreement in principle about the affirmation of tribal criminal jurisdiction throughout our reservation. That is what McGirt said, that the tribes have jurisdiction over the entirety of the reservation. Under this agreement in principle, the Cherokee Nation still has jurisdiction throughout its reservation. On the civil side, which the court doesn't really address, but even on the civil side, under the agreement in principle, it would affirm the jurisdiction of the Cherokee Nation throughout its reservation boundaries. So I think that is incorrect.
One more on this one. Specifically in Section 2B, the agreement states that the 5 tribes, along with Oklahoma, will ask Congress to codify the Montana standard for the tribal civil jurisdiction over non-Indians. Montana versus United States is a harmful Supreme Court decision from 1981, which limits the civil jurisdiction of Native nations over non-natives. This agreement does not say Montana, but the language is near identical and is clearly meant to reflect the Montana decision. The agreement states that the 5 tribes in Oklahoma will ask Congress to pass a law limiting tribal civil jurisdiction over non-Indians, only those situations where the non-Indians has a consensual relationship, such as contracts with the tribe.
And I'm glad you asked that question because I've seen that raised multiple times, and the answer to that is clear. So the agreement in principle says that accordingly, the 5 tribes and the Oklahoma Attorney General today recommend to Oklahoma's congressional delegation a set of principles that memorialize a shared position. That is different than saying codify. When we talk about Montana in here, I don't talk about Montana because I think Montana needs to be codified. I talk about Montana because that is the rule of law in Indian country. It doesn't matter whether I like Montana. There are things about Montana I certainly don't like. Things I would change if I got to decide Montana, it would have come out a lot differently than the way that it did. But we're still bound by that. We're still bound by the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in this area when tribes have civil jurisdiction and when they don't. And the Montana case and its progeny describe that. So for purposes of us trying to memorialize our position, because the audience for this document is not just tribal citizens, but it's the non-tribal community in Oklahoma as well. It's helping them understand that there's already Supreme Court law which limits tribal jurisdiction over non-Indians, because there are a lot of non-Indians out there who said, well, can the tribe come and just take my house now that I live on a reservation? Can the tribe, there's a lot of concern in the non-Indian community about what this means living on a reservation. They have no idea. So we're making sure that we are putting in here this understanding that Montana limits tribal jurisdiction. Montana and its progeny limits it. It's not saying we intend to codify it. And whether we like it or not, it's the law of the land. That's what we all have to live under in this country as Indian tribes.
Okay, I have just a couple more. If the state of Oklahoma, in response to McGirt, wants to ask Congress to take jurisdiction away from Native nations, let Oklahoma fight for that on its own, just as it fought with the Muskogee Creek Nation for its jurisdiction. Helping the state out in this way over fear that not getting on board with the legislative agreement early to affirm our reservation is preserved is just self-defeating if we concede this amount of sovereignty.
So, and again, I think they misread the agreement in principle, and I don't mean that people are doing that with ill intent. It is like most documents that are created by a committee. It is not as clear as it could be. It's not as specific as it could be. And so I don't blame them for having those questions for sure. But that is not what we're doing. We're not limiting. We're not agreeing, saying, hey, state of Oklahoma, or hey, Congress, take away our criminal jurisdiction throughout our reservation. We're not saying that. That's not something that we would ever agree to, and we don't agree to it, and it's not represented that way in the agreement principle.
Okay, just a couple more. Sales, are we going to be able to change the situation with sales tax?
So the taxation issues generally are issues upon which there is not broad agreement. So I would have to say on taxation issues, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, and then the 5 tribes can accomplish the same end result without federal legislation to direct government-to-government compacting jurisdiction over these issues instead of contracts.
I think that there is a sort of a sliding scale of legislation to compacting. I think more compacting is better for the tribes and for the state than more legislation, because legislation, I think we do need federal legislation, but I think there's a lot of things that can be compacted and we can avoid doing as much federal legislation if we have more compacting. So I think depending on who we have to deal with in that, some things will certainly need to be in legislation. Other things certainly can be compacted.
I agree with that, and I would remind the council lady and Mr. Speaker and the body that our most successful compact is the gaming compact, born of federal statute. Sometimes it's necessary when it's a matter of criminal law, which is a matter of federal law. It's a matter of federal statute. I cannot live in a world in which I close my eyes and put my hands over my ears and wish that Congress lacked this authority. I live in a world where they do have this authority, and I rest assured I will be at the table to protect our rights.
Councilor Shaw, are you through?
Yes, I am.
Hey,
Thank you.
before we move on, the Montana, we're not going to codify that, correct?
That it was not the intent, was not to codify Montana permanently in Oklahoma Indian country. The intent was to acknowledge that the principle of Montana applies in Indian country in Oklahoma as it applies in Indian country throughout the United States. No legislation has been written. There is no piece of federal legislation. All we have right now is this agreement in principle where we're trying to walk through what does this mean for us, what does this mean for the state, and making sure that the non-Indian community, especially the regulated community, the business community, understood that there are limitations on tribal authority over non-Indians. I don't like those limitations, but the limitations exist, and the non-Indian community needs to understand the application of Montana in Indian country.
Okay, Councilor Dare.
Yeah, I'm going to still kick on about the codify and the Montana stuff, so it's a 3 or 4 part question here. Why would we ask Congress to codify the Montana exception? Because they're narrow, and asking Congress to pass a law about it, we aren't giving up the possibility of expanded recognition of civil jurisdiction. Or does that language actually have things open for evolving civil jurisdictions? And if so, what are we intending Congress to do?
So the language, the original, again, as this document was being put together, when we originally talked about it, we talked about putting in there Montana and its progeny, which is Montana and the cases that interpret Montana, which by and large have not been favorable to tribes, to be honest. But certainly it leaves the door open to in the future if the court comes to its senses, as it did in McGirt, and changes what the law is as it relates to Montana and expands tribal civil jurisdiction, that the tribe would benefit from that.
Hey, Councilor Dare, you're still up.
That's all I had, sir. I was just trying to figure out that, you know, basically if it involves civil jurisdiction, but she answered mine, but you answered hers, so. That's all I have. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Crittenden.
Now, Sarah, I just want to talk about where we're at right now.
Right.
You said something a while ago, that the B word, the non-binding. So whether we support this and really like it, or some people may not. You said, am I following you, non-binding, this is where we're at right now?
This is just an agreement in principle that we have reached with Oklahoma. There is no legal mechanism to enforce this. So someone cannot file a lawsuit and say, well, you agreed to this, and therefore you have to follow everything that's in here.
That's where we're at right now.
That's where we're at. It is an agreement in principle.
And you mentioned Governor Stitt put together a little work group today.
Yeah, just
Okay.
about an hour ago, I saw a new executive order of his.
Will he be consulting us to find out what they're going to lay on the table? Do you think they're going to ask us, like right now? Or are they collectively coming up with something just like you guys have done to lay on the table? Just like the special interest group will probably do.
The special interest, special interest groups have already
So
done it.
Oklahoma, special interest group's going to do this. Oklahoma's going to do this. And we're just doing this too, is that?
Well, and the benefit that we have is that we've been working with the Oklahoma Attorney General, right? So we have the top legal officer of the state of Oklahoma working with the legal officers of the 5 tribes to put something together that we think makes sense. I think the delegation looks at this as a cooperative process and therefore one that they're inclined to support. I don't know what Governor Stitt intends to, his executive order came out an hour ago. I don't know what he intends to do. I do know we have had difficulty with Governor Stitt discussing important matters to tribes. And we've had better luck discussing important matters with tribes with the Attorney General. So I feel like,
I guess what I was getting at was, they're going to lay something out, what they want this to look like, right?
yeah, there are definitely other groups. I've already seen draft legislation from other groups that lay down, rules that say, the tribes will have the civil and criminal jurisdiction as if their reservations have been disestablished at statehood. There are people that want that result for sure. I mean, we're not the only ones out here working on this. And apparently, Governor Stitt now has some other process in mind. So I think you are exactly right on that, Council.
We're just getting, like someone said, on the train.
Right.
Because others are already on the train.
Right. Trying to get off the tracks, I think, is the metaphor the chief used.
And I want to be clear on the non-binding, even if you didn't agree with what I just said. Let's say you think it's no good. It's non-binding right now. There's lots more negotiations to do, right?
Yes.
I think they could put out a whole lot of fires if people would realize that.
Amen.
Okay, and at this point, we are establishing a task force ourselves. I see you, council members. We went around one time, and so we will probably do the same, Chief Sarah, is establish a task force ourselves to go in and negotiate this legislation that has not been written yet. This is just a principal document right now, correct?
These are just an agreement in principle with the Oklahoma Attorney General.
This is kind of our shopping list here.
Right, and it's something that we have agreement on with the Oklahoma Attorney General. So it's not just us saying this is everything we want, but these are things that we think will work and things that he thinks will work and his office thinks will work. So it is a foundation that we can use to build legislation that can have some broad consensus so that our legislation, is the one that has the broadest consensus agreement on it.
Sure.
That's the intent.
And usually legislation, now correct me here, Washington DC level, it's marked up, goes through committees, and the whole process normally takes 4 to 6 months, correct?
It just depends. The Cigar Act took us, well over a year. And sometimes it goes, in-house midnight rider, went through in weeks. It depends.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
And the people that are worrying out there that we're going to come in and take their house, since the Indians are a little bit in control here.
Yeah.
So, we're just going to treat you guys like you treated us, back in 1820. We're going to be nice to you.
That's fair.
Yeah, we went to their schools. So anyway, I think we got a couple more council members that want to have input. Councilor Austin, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Speaker. As of this moment, McGurk/Murphy we are not under the effect of it, correct? Right? It's that has not been affirmed by the Supreme Court, or whatever the right term is, that it actually affects us yet.
There's been no court decision about the Cherokee Nation's reservation.
Okay.
Correct.
So our attempt at this point is to get ahead of the decision and make sure that we're prepared for what does come out. Because right now, we're still talking theory. We're not talking, we've not got anything from the Supreme Court saying this affects you yet.
Yeah, there's been no decision from any court talking about the Cherokee Nation's reservation. It's widely believed by people who are knowledgeable in federal Indian law and knowledgeable in the law of the 5 tribes that it will apply to all the 5 tribes. But Gorsuch specifically says in his opinion that it's a case-by-case matter, and that's true. Every individual tribe's history, its patent, its allotment agreements, all of that, is unique to every tribe, and there can be different decisions, and different judges will hear it. So,
well, he specifically, in his language, feels like he challenged the Congress to take on this issue if they wish.
Yes.
The wording he used, I can't recall, but it's basically, Congress, it's in your hands.
Yeah.
If you wish to do something about it.
If you wish to violate these promises, then you will have to do so explicitly. We will not do it for you. That was what I understood him to be saying.
And I see this engagement as an opportunity to get that before it gets off the tracks, which it well could, with the interests that are fighting it throughout the United States and the state of Oklahoma right now. We know our governor has made statements about regarding the gaming compact and that what's good for all 4 million Oklahomans, and we got to recognize that as tribal citizens of the Cherokee Nation, we're a couple 100,000 out of 4 million Oklahomans. And the governor's made many statements about the what's good for all 4 million. I'm not sure that the governor is going to be the best fighter for our interests right now. I'm sure glad that our chief is, I'm sure glad that our attorney general is, and I'm sure glad you guys have foresight not to wait and get out ahead of this issue and start these conversations now so that we actually are somewhat in the driver's seat and not in the reactionary seat. If we'd waited until the decisions came out, we'd be reacting. Today we're deciding. We still have time to craft. We still have time to have say. This is a framework, in my opinion. I think framework is probably a better word than agreement.
Yeah, in retrospect, agreement principle is probably not the best word for it. Framework, shared principles. It was really just the words we stuck at the top of the document to try to explain what we felt like we were putting forward to everyone. So that criticism is.
As our counselor Jim Brown has said, that I've said words mean things, and sometimes they get you in trouble. And I think that particular word was maybe ill-advised, but. I think framework and principle would have been a better use of a term there.
You may well be right about that.
But it really doesn't change anything. No. It's just a word for this particular purpose. We've not signed anything. We've not agreed to anything. We have made a path to go down. And then we'll see where this path takes us. I'm pleased that we are making great progress quickly, and we're not waiting until something happens and we're reacting to it. We are trying to take control while we still have some control. Thank you.
Councilor Buzzer.
Yes, Chair, I got a couple of things. I guess the first thing, you just talked about the timing of this. Is this something that has to be done now? Or can you get more input?
We certainly have time to get more input. I think there's the time pressure, there's different pressures here. On the one hand, Congress is going to do what Congress is going to do on their own schedule. And so we don't have control over the timing here. I can't say, I think we need to have 6 months of conversations and then we'll decide to do something different. Because Congress may have a different idea. They may decide, there's just a lot of different forces at work. The other issue is that there's going to be, the Creek Nation law enforcement, they've got a big job to do over there. It is a job that's going to require tons of their resources. There's going to be problems and solutions and hiccups, and there's going to be a lot of issues over there. And I know that they, sort of taking a step back from this process. But I also think that there is an emerging situation, and we don't know when a Cherokee Nation decision may come down. A criminal, so there are petitions filed every day, criminals trying to get out of convictions or get out of responsibility for crimes that they committed, and are filing motions to that effect. The court is eventually going to hear those and make a decision, and then we will have the law enforcement problems that we need to solve. So it's not something that we have to do, today. We have time to have these discussions, but also facts are going to continue to develop around us. And those pressures will continue to build, I think.
And the reason I asked that is because once this came out, I've had several lawyers to email me about how things could work, and I think Mary and some of the other people have too. And I don't know, you probably heard them by now, but I don't think you heard them when you were doing the negotiations with the Attorney General. And maybe have not heard all of their input. That's the reason I'm asking you that they have to be done now.
No, I think we have time. We have time
Okay.
to have these discussions, and Chief, in his most recent statement specifically said, I never think I'm the smartest person in the room. I don't think I have the best ideas on every topic. I think I always want to hear other great ideas about how to do things, because there are people that may be more creative and smarter than me, and I want to hear what those people have to say.
And that's what I'm getting
And if
at.
those people, reach out, I think certainly we'll always listen to constituents that want to reach out and share those ideas.
And the other thing, this is just a comment. I was happy when it came out and said all the 5 tribes were in agreement with this. I thought, well, this has really been worked out. And then now we hear that there's 2 tribes that's not, so there's some problems there. Because I think we're stronger if we can get the 5 tribes together to go together. And that's the reason I'm mentioning the time. If we cannot go back and solicit those tribes' opinion or get an input from them to see if we can't work it out, and get the 5 tribes. I think it's really, really important that we all stick together. So that's the reason I was asking about that.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I completely agree, and I will continue to talk to the other lawyers for the 5 tribes about all of these issues, because it affects all of us, and I think that we have got a good relationship. And I understand that every tribe has their own pressures, and every tribal leader has to do what they think is right, but we also want to continue to work with them and move forward with them as much as we can as a group, because,
Sure.
Chief could
And I would-
overrule that sentiment as he wishes, but I think that that's equally important to us, that
And
we
I would
get
feel a
everything
lot
together.
better if we had the 5 tribes come in to it. Go ahead.
And if I could, Mr. Speaker, I mean what I say, councilors and fellow leaders, that I have listened this weekend. I listened to the messages that I received, I listened to the phone calls and texts you sent me. I've listened to our dear friend Stacy Leeds. I've watched the reaction in the media, and that's why this morning I convened a call as president of the Intertribal Council, and my message was this: gentlemen, we will get the best work done if we are all together. We may not be 5 together today within the bounds of a piece of paper, but we will get there, and it's important we get there. And to a leader, they all agreed 100%, so I have supreme confidence we'll do it. But if anyone wants to put to the test whether we will take our time and listen, I think that test has been passed based on the representations I've made to you here today, which are sincere, based on my statement to the media, along with the other chiefs. So you have that commitment, Councilman. I'm going to balance that against the fact that I always have to watch Congress. I always have to be ready to go to the table, and I think I'm constitutionally empowered to do that. We will, I think, determine today if this body has the confidence in me to continue to do that. Thank you very much, Mr.
And I just have one more. I guess what concerns me a lot, and I don't really understand the domestic violence issue on the Montana case. That's what really concerns me. The other thing, and I don't know that this is true or not, but some people have said about this is going to be codified through Congress, after Lankford or Mullins or somebody makes a presentation or send a bill, if there's anything that is trying to be codified through Congress.
Well, the agreement in principle, eventually there will be legislation of some kind. And codification is really just a fancy way of saying turning something into written law in the code books, right? And so there is an intent that there will be a piece of legislation. I think the concern people have had is, are we going to codify Montana and say these specific things are, this forever delineates what tribal jurisdiction over non-Indians looks like in the 5 tribes. That's not been the discussion that we've had. The discussion we had was, it's so complex and there are so many different issues that trying to talk about every single possible thing that the tribes might have jurisdiction over is impossible, but we do have the Montana case which answers that question in 95% of the cases. So instead of trying to write a big elaborate law to cover everything, let's just reference Montana and its progeny. And so that's, and on the VAWA issue, you know, I too think that's a supremely important issue to me, and I understand, and I think it's true that there are non-Indians who use the Montana exception all the time to say, well, you can't enforce that order against me because I don't have a consensual relationship with the tribe. And that's true, but Montana is still the law of the land. That's still the law in the United States. And the way we hold those people accountable is by exercising our special domestic violence jurisdiction. We can directly take them into Cherokee Nation tribal court and hold them responsible. Or we can use our full faith and credit protective orders that we have with Oklahoma to work together to be sure that these women are protected. So I understand people's concern about Montana. I understand how abusers have used that. But I think in this circumstance, we are being careful to provide women the maximum amount of protection that we can.
That helps a lot. The other thing that I would just, and this is just a comment about, I've always felt that we have a right to hunt and fish. The other thing, I think somebody mentioned the water rights, so I certainly wouldn't want to get that at those are true and dear to most Cherokee parks and most cougars. But they want to go down and catch crawdads. The game warden came out and said, no, you can only catch 2 dozen. Well, they're only catching them for their own family to eat, so that is really dear to my heart as far as water rights go and also hunting and fishing. So as long as that's not on the table for this here.
No, and I feel, I think you know how I feel about those topics too. I feel the same way, and that's why it specifically says subject to limitations concerning tribes and tribal hunting, fishing, and water rights protected by treaty or other federal law. Those are exempted from any discussion. We're not going to touch any of those topics, and I think that the McGurk case is helpful for the tribes on all those fronts.
Thanks, sir.
You good, Councilor Buzzer? Okay, we went around the table.
Speaker, I just have one more question. I just wanted to kind of clarify the error here because I did ask Chief a very important question, and I wanted him to answer council on where you got the power to agree on behalf of the Cherokee Nation.
So I think that you, Councilman, I think that you are misreading the law. I think that the principal chief has the authority to, and I've also explained that this is not a binding agreement. This is an agreement in principle that we have entered into to explain our framework. So there is nothing here that the tribal council needs to approve, and everything that's been done is well within the executive authority of the principal chief. I heard what you read. I think that you misread it, and we're just going to disagree on that, I think.
Okay, appreciate it. Appreciate it, Speaker.
Okay. Yes, one more.
If I understand it right, and this is kind of a big deal to me, are we going to be a public law 280 state? Is this going to turn us into that? Because that is a bad deal.
No, sir. We are not becoming a public law 280 state. Public law 280 states are different in multiple respects, and in a public law 280 state, the state has jurisdiction over the entirety of the reservation. Under no circumstances would tribal trust or restricted land ever be under the jurisdiction of the state. That continues to be protected in this agreement, and that's quite different than in a public law 280 state, where even on tribal trust and restricted land in a public law 280 state, the state has jurisdiction. They do not have jurisdiction here. The other difference is in a public law 280 state, the United States has totally ceded its jurisdiction to the state. There is no United States jurisdiction. And at least at this point, the United States, this agreement in principle does not propose to let the United States off the hook in that regard. This agreement in principle maintains the United States jurisdiction over the reservation. That is incredibly different than a public law 280 state.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's very important.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad am I glad yet? Okay. Two more council members. All right, let's make it brief because I'm going to call on someone to give me a 3-minute narrative when you two get through.
I just got a real short one, Sarah. When you do go to Congress and doing this, do we have to reference the Montana, or is that, where'd that go?
Well, we don't have legislation drafted yet, and so I can't.
Well, no, I was just saying because it's in there. I didn't know if that was something that had to be referenced or we could use out, or.
I don't know what the legislation will look like, and it's not going to be entirely up to me, all right? Because even though, let's say they did let me draft the entirety of what the legislation would look like, that when that goes to Congress, then it goes to legislative council, who goes through there and decides whether what you said is really what they think you should have said. So I mean, it's not my intent to codify Montana. As I've discussed, that's not what the agreement principle stands for. I do not know what that will look like right now.
I was just saying as a non-attorney reading it, because it's like it, you reference something that we're not really sure that you intend. That's all I have.
Right.
Okay. Councilor Shaw.
Very quickly, Sarah, would this have anything, would this put a cap on expansion of the Major Crimes Act, Section 1151? No. And would it affect environmental taxes?
No and no.
Good. Okay, we went around the table. We got Councilor Smith and Councilor Jordan. They're going to yield their 3-4 minutes to Stacy Leeds. Is that okay with the? I want to hear what she's got to say. Former judge, former dean of law. Stacy, would you please come and just give us a brief narrative on your take in this and if we're moving in the right direction?
Councilman, am I excused?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me here today. I came to talk to the chief this morning, not because I believed 100% the same way that he believes, and not that I am 100% on board with these principles. But I asked if we could spend some time really talking through some ideas that might be considered, and specifically asking, since I think time is on our side, can we slow down and really think through every angle? And I agreed to come in here to this meeting. You all know me, and I would never agree to be a political prop for something that I don't believe in, and you all know that. I'm here because I believe that he exercised exceptional leadership in that meeting with me, and that he truly is going to listen to a bunch of different viewpoints. And I'm here because I was also told that there is no, draft legislation in secret that has been written up that everybody has agreed on. And to the points that were asked by many of you today, I asked that same question: is this a done deal? And I was told that it was not, and I was told that there's open minds, and that people with backgrounds like mine, either in our tribe or around the nation, there is a sincere willingness to listen and to put brains together and try to come up with the best idea. And so I agreed to come into this meeting to entertain any of those questions that you might have, and to lend my services with a lot of other people around the country to make sure, as I've described to the chief, that we all really understand how big of a deal that this is. I told him that I think that this is a once-in-8-generation decision-making time, and that it's that serious. And so that's why I'm here today. I appreciate in a day like this that he would take 2 hours of his time to sit and actually listen and to hear all the ideas that I'm hearing from people around the country. And so I'm happy to entertain any questions specifically that you all have for me, but that's why I'm in the building today.
Councilor Shaw.
Got it. Thank you for being here, and congratulations. I understand nuptials just happened.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate being here. I have one question.
Yeah.
If I understood our Attorney General right, this is non-binding. I'm not an attorney. Explain that to me, what that entails.
I think the word framework was probably the better choice. And I think that these are some parameters as a starting point. But, I truly believe that there has not been an agreement reached that these are talking points to start us off with. And I'll say what you brought up. My biggest concern was the Montana language and the civil jurisdiction. And when we talked that through this morning, I understand that what was being said was, this is the state of the law as it exists right now. And I don't think that there's intention to put that, like Sarah said, to codify that in a piece of federal legislation. And so I was glad to hear you bring that up, because that was one of the 3 points that I too wanted to have some clarification about what the conversation has been to this point. So thank you for that.
Good. That VAWA case, I have to have some comfort there. I can't support anything that doesn't address that. So anyway, anybody else? I mean, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your questions. I mean, if there was a non-disclosure agreement, I understand from administration why this couldn't be discussed, but we're discussing it now. And I apologize for taking up some of the time over there, Chair of the Finance, but this was important.
It is important.
Okay. One more comment here.
I'd just like to say thank you for being here today. But I think it's important, a person like yourself who is outside of everything has come to give an opinion, has come to give your opinion on things. And that way it's not just from one side or another side. This is a totally separate, you're a totally separate person not having to do with anything. I think that's very important, especially for transparency wise, where you are respected and you do have stature in the Indian community. And I think it is very important for you to be here. I think it's a win for us that you're here. I don't mean to be so giving you so many compliments, but that's how strongly I feel about it. I just think that's probably one of the biggest deals that's happened today is to have somebody from the outside the Cherokee Nation that works here to come in to give their viewpoints. I think that's very big. Right. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm glad that you can't see me blush through a dark navy mask. And I'll continue to be as genuine and talk to any of you off the record after today's event. If any of you would like to do that, I pledge myself to each of you for that.
Okay. Councilor No Fire.
Stacy, we've come to know each other, and I think I'm very esteemed at your education, what you've done in your career through all vast parts of law, including Native American law. I'm glad that you're here. But just so, we have the variations of where we've said we've had, the Attorney General speaking on behalf of the Chief. Definitely I'm looking forward to having the discussion with our own legal counsel publicly, is, you still came here on behalf of the Chief, which is a different branch of government. So that way it still can be expressed that still on behalf of one branch of the government, not just independently. So, but I appreciate you being here. I really do, and I think a lot of you. Appreciate it, Speaker.
Okay.
Councilman, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
I truly am here in my individual capacity as a Cherokee citizen. I worked on the McGirt brief, and I was paid a small amount to do that when we had that case before the Supreme Court. That contract has been terminated, and I'm not under any contract with the Cherokee Nation. I'm here in my individual capacity, and quite frankly, Speaker, it's flattering to suggest that I should be on some task force to help negotiate. That's not what I want to do. I would rather be somebody from the community that helps give some advice here and there, but that's why we have an Attorney General, and that's why we have a Chief, and I'm neither of those things. So I will be here to help, and I will be here to be a public voice. But I am not here on behalf of the Chief. I am here in solidarity with the promise that the Chief will slow down, listen to everybody, and hear everybody out, and that's why I'm here today.
And if you would agree to be on that task force, I still support it. All right, let's move on to the other agenda items here. Old business, this is something we brought up about 3 or 4 months ago.
Point of order. Joe, I think that, I thought we were maybe finishing up with the rules, but I think we need to amend the agenda. I know
We're
we
gonna do that
discussed
at
the
the end.
ending. We're gonna do that at the end. Okay.
Are you going to waive the rest of the report?
Yes, we're just going to forego the reports. You have them before you. We'll come to those later. If you have any questions, just get with the directors or Shelley, and we'll take care of those. Except probably, is there anything urgent, Election Commission? Okay. All righty. Okay, nothing urgent. All right, this is this emergency code. I brought that up about 4 or 5 months ago, and this is to enhance and enable the executive branch to take care of this emergency. We didn't have really a code in place. We were taking care of business, and we did it in a good way. But actually, I thought we needed some type of a code to make sure that the chief and his staff had the resources to take care of this. So, and I think they provided their own version of it. I don't have a problem with that. So at this time, I want to move to, if no one would mind, I'd go ahead and take care of number 4 right now. We good? Okay. You want to take that, Canaan?
Sir, this is an act establishing the Cherokee Nation Emergency Management Act, and I put that in the form of a motion.
Second.
Okay, got a motion second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the ayes have it. Counselor Paskowski, you want to take the other one, number 1?
Are you wanting to amend the agenda now, Joe?
No, we're going to do that at the end. We did that because that was already on the emergency code.
Clarification,
Yes,
are we withdrawing your old business?
Yes.
Number 1?
yes.
Okay. You went for, okay, I follow you now, Joe.
We're debated enough.
Okay, so now we're back to new business?
Yes, new business.
Okay.
Counselor? Yes.
A resolution expressly agreeing to choice of law and binding arbitration and authorizing a limited waiver of sovereign immunity of the Cherokee Nation in connection with the use of Rank 1 Sports website. And I put that in the form of a motion.
Got a motion?
Second.
Got a second. Any discussion? I think this is just a renewal, correct? Yes, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Number 2, who's not a Washington Redskins fan? I'll have you do it.
I'll do it.
All right. Counselor Smith?
Resolution in supporting renaming of the Washington Redskins. Put that in the form of a motion.
Second.
Motion? Second? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you for that. There's a lot of tribes that do not have the luxury of living in a state like we do here in Oklahoma. Certain states just really have a difficult time of having mascots imposed on them. So they would really appreciate that. We do pretty well here in Oklahoma. So I want to thank you for that. Okay, next, Councilor Shaw, you want to take that, number 3?
Yes, I do. It's a legislative act amending Title 18, Article 3, Section 18 of the Cherokee Nation General Corporation Act, expanding the access for Cherokee Nation citizens to the Cherokee Nation Health Services Eyeglass Program, providing for severability and declaring an emergency. And I move that to pass. Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Speaker, I just got one question.
Yes, question, Councilor Duncan?
Does this add those people who are in that 18, 55 category?
Yes, it's my understanding that it will. What we're looking at doing is a voucher-based program. They have to be seen inside our clinic, but by using the voucher program, it allows them to get eyeglasses from any supplier that's maybe close to them or even perhaps online, and thereby reducing our overall cost. So it allows us to open this up and expand it out. So
wonderful.
So there's still some work to do on the back end as far as processes and policies and procedures, but we needed to enact this law to make that amendment to allow us to expand that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Number 5, Councilor Dobbins, you want to take that?
4, I think. We need a vote.
Oh, we didn't vote on that? Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. All opposed? All right, we have a discussion here, item number 5.
Speaker, I'd like to delay that until August.
Okay?
Good, provided we don't change the August meeting days.
Okay. We're getting a little better here. Okay. Councilor No Fire?
Speaker, I move to amend the agenda to include a resolution regarding legislation proposed by the 5 tribes. And for all the councilors, this is just to amend the resolution to bring it on today. This is just what the vote is so we can bring it on today so we can discuss. I think we've all been waiting to hear from our legal to attorney today, and by amending it, we're not voting on it just yet. It's just amending it to have it on there. So I'd like to amend the agenda, and we'll have to do, I think, a roll call on that, won't we, Joe?
Don't have to do roll call, it's just a resolution. Now, you want to do just discussion?
2/3. No, I'm putting in form of a motion so we can bring it forward, so I'm gonna need 2/3 vote.
Okay, got a motion to amend the agenda.
Just to amend, everybody.
I'll second.
Second.
You got a second? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Okay. To amend, are you going to do roll call on this?
Duncan?
Yes.
Rex Jordan?
Yes.
Darrell Legg?
Yes.
Wes Snowfire?
Yes.
Laura Petskowski?
No.
Mike Shambo?
No.
Mary Bakershaw?
Yes.
Leo Smith?
No.
Janice Taylor?
No.
Victoria Vasquez?
No.
Keith Austin?
No.
Early Buzzard?
Yes.
Joe Byrd?
Yes.
Julia Coates?
Yes.
Sean Crittenden?
Yes.
Joe Deere?
No.
Mike Dobbins?
Yes.
We have 10 to 7. We did not reach 2/3. The agenda is not amended.
Okay. All right, what's next?
Announcements. You are to announcements.
Okay, any announcements to my right? Announcements to my left? Motion to adjourn?
Movement.
How much time? Chair?